Greetings to you in the name of Yawasha, the Hashwar Hebrew name for Jesus. I'm Michael Hoshai, and I'm with you today to continue in the series Revelation in Light of Daniel with Part 7, Rome. Real briefly, we're just going to discuss a couple things here. We began in Daniel chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of the statue that you see before you. Its head of gold was Babylon, which is Nebuchadnezzar. Its silver chest and arms was Medo-Persia, which began with Cyrus. And the waist and belly of brass was Greece, which began with Alexander the Great. And then today we're going to discover the legs of iron, which is Rome. But we began seeing in the beast of Daniel that the first was like a lion, which has one head. And then the second was like a bear, which the lion represented Babylon, the bear represented Medo-Persia, and it also had one head. Then the leopard with four heads represented Greece, and the four heads represented the generals that broke apart Alexander's empire because it didn't leave an heir. And it drew down to two of the generals who were still alive to continue their empires, which was Seleucus and Ptolemy. Ptolemy being the emperor in Egypt and Africa, in that area there, and Seleucus empire being up around Syria and so forth. And so there are a lot of theologians that believe that Seleucus, or the Seleucid Empire, was the king of the north, and Ptolemaic Empire was the king of the south. And this is roughly backed up by the story of Cleopatra being the daughter of Ptolemy, or a descendant of Ptolemy. So at any rate, the leopard being with four heads, we had 6 heads on our notes. And now we're going to discover this fourth beast right here, which is related to Rome and the legs of iron. But you'll notice something about these legs. There are 2 of them. This is very important, and this is what starts a nasty history that would come all the way up to the point that we know it today. And as you can see, Daniel did not have a name for this beast other than a beast because it was so horrific. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that today. But first, we're going to go into the book of Daniel, chapter 7, which we had to deviate from to learn about Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which was our first citing within Scripture of the Antichrist behaviors. That was definite and backed up by history as well. So we had to go to Daniel chapter 8 to learn that one. If you haven't seen that, then I recommend you stop the video and go back to the previous video, which is Revelation in Light of Daniel, Part 6 Supplement, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Little Horn. But now we're going to go ahead and recap the scriptures that we began with. Here in Daniel chapter 7, verse 4 describes the first beast that we've seen, which was the lion and the wings. How it would stood up to me like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And verse 5 tells us of the bear and the 3 bones in its mouth, or the 3 ribs in its mouth, which we also discussed were successor kings who had great accomplishments and would be those ribs in succession to King Cyrus, who freed the Israelites out of captivity and the exilic period to go rebuild the temple and so forth. And then we have verse 6, and that speaks of the leopard, which was Alexander the Great. He came up against Persia, defeated them. There was a whole nasty business going on there with a lot of paid assassination and so forth. Alexander was a good king, but he was also kind of bloodthirsty. He has been known to kill a few of his own people out of anger. And so we learned how the 4 heads were his generals after Alexander died. He had no heir, and 4 generals busted it up. And 2 of those generals, Cassander and Lysimachus, One was killed, one died of a disease that left Seleucus and Ptolemy. Ptolemy reigned over Egypt and Africa, and Seleucus reigned over Syria and all that area above Jerusalem and so forth. And so these were believed to be Seleucus being the king of the north and Ptolemy being the king of the south. And out of the Seleucid Empire came Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which is where we deviated to go into chapter 8 and learn about him with some history as well. But today we're going to do verse 7, and we're going to learn about Rome today. And then we're going to set up for the next video, part 8, which would be the toes and the continuation of the empire. Let's read verse 7. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diversed from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Let's discuss a couple things here real briefly. In verse 7 here, when it said that the beast devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, it was meaning that it busted up the empire of the Greeks and just like annihilated it. Okay, and the whole reference of the image of the feet stamping and breaking in pieces is to show that this empire thought and cared nothing for its enemies' lives. And we're about to learn a little bit about how this came to be. So let's get into a little bit of history right here. And we're going to look at some things. It was after the Seleucid Empire fell that Rome would take over. And this was apparently done around 64 BC. And so the Seleucid Empire was destroyed. Well, the Ptolemaic Empire, which was lasting up until 30 BC, was continued on up to that point with Mark Antony and Cleopatra. This is the Cleopatra that you read a lot about, see pictures on Facebook and things of this nature. Under pages like Ancient Egypt and so forth. Cleopatra was this woman that you read about. She did everything she could for the continuation and the betterment of her children's lives. Married a couple individuals. They were counted as worthless marriages. At any rate, when Cleopatra died in 30 BC, Rome took over. And here it is that we're going to read a little bit about Rome. Real quick, it says right here, it says, Rome had completed their conquest for their empire with the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony in 30 BC. There were many rulers and co-regents that led Rome to its peak. However, for this study, we will be jumping to 286 AD when Emperor Diocletian divided the Roman Empire into East and West for administrative purposes. So with that being said, we need to understand that if we go back to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, this is why you see 2 legs right here. They were of iron. Now, Daniel described the beast with iron teeth, and which relates to the legs of iron. So with that being said, the Eastern Empire, which was Rome, which the Western Empire was Rome, and the Eastern Empire was in Constantinople, which is modern-day Turkey. However, for Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you see the 2 legs here, and this represents the break of that empire. We're going to look at some of the emperors that from the beginning, and I can give you a little bit of brief history of how they continued with the violence and brutality of Antiochus IV. You remember Antiochus, he went in, if any of the Jewish families were found with the scriptures or anything, they were slaughtered, if not sold into slavery. And then he defiled the altar at the temple. He defiled the temple. He built a statue of himself. Of Zeus with his face of himself upon the statue, representing himself as God. Now, what we're going to look at here real quick is you had Augustus. I don't really know a whole lot about Augustus, but this guy right here, Tiberius, this was the guy who was ruling when Messiah, Yahusha, better known to most people as Jesus, walked the earth. You'll see that the date right here is 14 to 37 CE. Now, Christ's ministry began when he was about 30 years old, and it lasted up until he was 33. We have evidence that he was born right at the shift between BC and AD. And what you're seeing here is the years from 14 AD, what they've got listed here as current era CE, to 37 AD. So Christ came in and he went from 30 AD to 33. You will hear people say 32, 31, 30, so forth, but we have evidence showing contrary to that it was indeed in 33 AD when he was crucified. However, this guy right here, Tiberius, he was a nasty individual. He was known for slaughtering his own soldiers. For example, if a soldier was present and had been drinking, he would tie off the man's penis and then funnel wine into his stomach. And the reason he would tie his genitals off was because he didn't want any fluids escaping the body. So the man would be in excruciating pain from his stomach filling up, his bladder filling up, and it would torture him. And then this emperor Tiberius would give the command to slice the man's gut open and finally give him relief, which was actually death, and in a twisted sense in the minds of these emperors would be a release. Quite the man of violence and brutality. Well, his grandson Caligula, this guy right here, they made a movie about this guy, and I do not recommend that you watch it, because the movie that was made originally about this gentleman was none other than a pornography film. But it does give credence to the fact that the man was a little bit insane. Well, okay, a whole lot insane. And he did some very nasty things. He had a lot of people killed. The man who would put him in the emperor's chair, he had him killed as a traitor to the emperor, to the empire. And then he turned around and he brought the wives of his senate, who he did not trust and wanted to get even with. He built a royal or noble brothel and made the wives of the senators the ladies of the brothel. And any individual could come in and sleep with their wives, for nominal amounts of money. And the whole reason behind this was to balance the treasury. Later, Caligula was killed by the man that he put as captain over his guard, and so was his wife and his infant daughter. And then you had Nero. I don't know if you know a whole lot about Nero, but Nero was the one who started persecuting the Jews, and he somehow set a fire in Rome, and it burned a lot of Rome. And so he started blaming the Christians and the Jews for this fire as rebellion against the Roman Empire. And I don't know if you've seen the documentary film of Paul, the Apostle of Christ. You'll see that this guy would actually have the Christians and the Jews placed on poles throughout the city and set on fire to light the streets at night. And that's what this guy, Emperor Nero, did. So, as you can see, the brutality and violence that came against Christianity and the Jews by Rome was just utterly disgusting, to be honest with you. And so, at any rate, let's continue on without further ado. You'll see Vespasian here. This guy was the emperor when the temple was thrown down in 70 AD. And what happened there is the Jews were starting to rise up against and rebel against the Roman Empire because of the way they were being oppressed. They were being picked on. They were being beaten. They were being taxed. It was just insane. And so when they started to rebel, this guy Vespasian sent in his armies, and which surrounded the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the city around it. And as they marched in, they just began killing at leisure whomever got in their way, whether people were armed or unarmed. Most of them, if not all of them, were unarmed. And then they made their way up to the temple and made the priests stand out in front, and they burnt the temple. They set it on fire, and the temple blocks were thrown down over the wall, which some of them are still there today. And so it was believed that the gold, it got so hot that the gold began to melt and seep down into the stones of the Temple Mount, and the Roman soldiers were tearing it apart to get to that gold. That was supposedly the reason, but ultimately it was the rebellion against this emperor and the Roman Empire that would bring this into play. So then, as we read, we found out that Diocletian separated the empire, which happened right here, this gentleman right here. Now, what was going on is, again, Rome was just taxing these people and taxing their own people as well to pay for all the armies that were out there on the front lines protecting the empire. And as this kept on going and kept on going, because the empire was so vast, they had to have the armies all on the front lines. This is why Pontius Pilate did not want a rebellion when he was getting ready. He was dealing with the Pharisees and so forth that wanted to crucify Jesus. The whole reason why he didn't want that to happen is because he would have had to pull soldiers from these front lines to quell the rebellion or the riot of the Jews if he did not crucify Christ. This is what ensured, this is how the Father ensured that the Son would become our sin and offer salvation. This is how it came about. And this guy, Diocletian, after taxing and being oppressing the people, he finally divided the empire and ultimately left the Western Empire, which was Rome, to itself and bolted out to Constantinople. And so here it is that the Western Empire was left to itself. And this would leave the bishops of Rome to ultimately choose who would be their rulers or their government. And this is what brought in the toes or the continuations of the empire that we've learned about. So ultimately, today's video is to understand this. When the Roman Empire defeated the Greek Empire and took over all that Greece was ruler of, they did it with brutal force and authority, saying, if you don't do what we tell you to do, you're going to die. And this is proven all throughout the entire history of these emperors that you see here. So, as we've learned, Antiochus IV Epiphanes started this with defiling the altar and the temple with the principle of, if you don't believe or do what I tell you to do, you're going to die. And as per Daniel's vision of the fourth beast being unnamed as an animal, you have renditions of what this beast looked like. And this is apparently what it looked like to one artist. And as you can see, it has the 10 horns here, which we're going to get into in the next video. However, the beast itself was none other than Rome, and its brutality is known throughout history. There are very rare moments where the emperors of Rome did not continue this blasphemy against God's people, and they would oppress them, kill them, burn them on poles to light the city streets. They would crucify them. There is an untold amount of crucifixions. Crucifixion was not only a shame, but it was one of the most brutal ways to die, because the weight of your body would sink in on itself, causing massive pain. And if you didn't die from that, then they would come through and they'd stab you in the heart with a spear, break your knees, preferably. The Christ was stabbed with a spear because it was prophesied that his bones should not be broken. But they would come by with this big hammer and just break the knees of the people to make sure that they were dead. And if the weight of their body didn't kill them, the suffering didn't kill them, then surely the breaking of the knees and the pain would. And this is all Rome's doing. They would crucify people upside down. They would put them on beams that made an X and sprawl their legs and their arms out, and even hang them upside down also. It was very, very brutal. And so Rome, this is why Rome looks like this beast in this artist's rendition, because it was brutal. And as we're going to learn through the continuations, the brutality continues on. But we're also going to learn about a little horn right here that did more than just continue what Antiochus IV Epiphanes did. So with that being said, I hope you learned a little bit today. The bishops of Rome that were continuing through all this period, they were very, shall we say, greedy. And they didn't mind sacrificing people as well. And they would do this by whispering in the emperor's ear, which we will get into in the next video in the continuations. So here it is. Be prepared. We're going to learn about this little nasty fellow right here who pops up on this nasty fellow's head and plucks out 3 of those other horns. Thank you for joining me. And until we see you next time, have a good day.